Welcome to Influential Entrepreneurs, bringing you interviews with elite business leaders and experts, sharing tips and strategies for elevating your business to the next level. Here's your host, Mike Saunders.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Influential Entrepreneurs. This is Mike Saunders, the Authority Positioning Coach. Today we have with us Carol Sanford, who's the founder and designer of the Regenerative Business Development Community. Carol, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Mike.
Hey, I'm looking forward to talking with you. I know you are a thought leader and author of many books and podcasts, so I'm excited to learn from you. So give us a little bit of your background and entrepreneurial journey.
Well, I founded and eventually sold or merged two companies when I was quite young. So I learned about being an entrepreneur the hard way. But I then moved into teaching in university settings and inside of companies about how it is you can think about having a business that can make a huge difference and also make an ethical, enduring income for you or your family. I've since created a whole set of things you just said. I have a podcast, Business Second Opinion, where I critique Harvard Business Review one article at a time. I have 6 books, and my most recent one is kind of fun, and we'll talk about that probably as we go along. But it's a whole different way of thinking about how to have change happen, and I'm giving away all sorts of things for people who choose to buy it.
Excellent. Well, I think that the word change scares a whole lot of people personally and professionally. So I think that that's a really powerful topic.
I agree. And I think that the reason people are afraid of change is they're thinking about out of control where I don't have anything to do with it. It happens to me. But you and I are working with business people who depend on change or they become very outdated. But they have old theories which are based on behaviorism. Someone else is going to tell me what to do. I get rewards or punishment for it. So this has nothing to do with that. It has to do with how to lead yourself in change and a community or a business. And I've done this with Google and DuPont down to Numi Tea and other small businesses you would have never heard of.
And I think that one thing that I think is indicative of motivation, and as it relates to change, is you need to find the reason why change is needed so that it draws you toward it and not pushes you where you feel pressured to change. You want to make adjustments, which equals change for that purpose, right?
I would agree with that. I think motivation is much more able to stay alive and meaningful for us if it is intrinsically activated, which is what you're talking about, rather than I have to. And you can actually awaken yourself to changing if you think about a different kind of difference you could make or something would really matter, like Jeffrey Hollander, who founded Seventh Generation, which is now owned by Unilever. He was looking out in the world and he said, my life feels kind of meaningless. You know, I got a rich family and I want to do something with meaning. And he asked the question, which I find is very helpful to a lot of people, which is, what is it that really needs doing in the world that I'm most capable of stepping up to? That kept him going his whole life when I offered him that question.
You know, I think that that reminds me of a coaching kind of a mentality of, hey, if you want to start a business, what would you just love to do without getting paid at all? And let's find a way to monetize that. Well, I think that just is the concept of that intrinsic motivation and finding something that you're passionate about rather than the quote unquote punching the clock. So is that kind of a mentality that you would subscribe to and then even would coach clients on as well?
Well, I actually don't coach. I'm an educator, and let me tell you why, because it's related to motivation. I try and get people over the idea that someone else can coach them and learn how to develop their own thinking. And so I do a bit of sharing how motivation really works and not the behavioral knowledge we have of pain, incentives, rewards. That's how animals work. And that's where the research was done on that. How we really work is not so much starting with ourselves, which was your question. What would you want to do if you didn't have to worry about getting paid? Where motivation really starts is, where do you want to make a difference because of something out there that matters? And sometimes that's our children. Sometimes it's our volunteer work. But if we start with the world we live in and maybe what our life could be like, I think that's where real intrinsic motivation starts. If we start with what we want, it's a fairly small starting place. So it's not radical. It's not like what you said, but the starting point, I think, is very different.
Yeah, and it's similar to the old saying, if you want to see change in the world, be the change. Don't just point the finger and go, this should be different. What could you do to start that process and that ball rolling, right?
Absolutely, and that's a quote from Gandhi. Gandhi said, be the change. And what he was really saying is, if you have a belief something should be, you better start with working on yourself. Because rarely, or let me say it another way, often when we see something that someone else should change, or a group or a country, it actually is starting in us, but we can't see it belongs to us yet. So, for example, with me, I can get very judgmental because, I get to think I'm smart and I know and should be able to see people and know what they should change. So I always start with substituting my own name for what I'm saying to them. So if I'm saying, you guys should be more inventive or innovative, I go back and say, all right, if I was saying that to myself, what would it say? And, of course, mine are more like, I end up saying, don't be so judgmental, and there I am, being judgmental. So I think be the change is more about when we see something outside, take a little double check, a little look here and say, how does that fit me, and how do I be that change? And then I actually believe, and this is not a widely held belief, that me changing me begins to change everything around me. I talk differently, I think differently, and for one thing, I never know what to write for other people, in spite of, my certainty. So that's how I interpret that quote. I think that's still in the direction you were going.
Yeah, exactly. And it really is something where it reminds me of the compound effect. Darren Hardy wrote that book, and just talking about you don't need to make massive changes. Many times it's just this 1% change here and 1% change there, and that compound effect just makes that amplify.
Every what I call wisdom teacher, like the indigenous leaders I've studied with, spiritual leaders, the quantum scientists, they use a term that's very much like that. And I give you that background just to say that's not one idea, that's an ancient idea. And the way they phrase it is your energy changing. It's a multiplier effect beyond you, right? So it's compounding multiplier that it comes from you being different, not necessarily even doing, although that will lead to doing, and it will have a ripple. There's another word for it. And so I think this time we're right on the mark with the same way of seeing it, and it's an ancient idea.
I love the ripple and amplifying. I mean, all of that just makes so much sense, and it really reminds me of the old butterfly effect. Like one little thing can make something change and make an impact way down the line that you don't even realize in that respect.
I really agree with you on that one. So there's another piece about change that's kind of important to what you just said. Einstein, and not that I'm as smart as him, but I love to read him, says that if you try and use the same theory of change that you created the problem we're in, you're very likely to create another problem in trying to solve it. In other words, we get stuck kind of in the way we see the world. And you have to ask, well, what in the world does that mean? Well, he told us in the lecture he gave translated that it meant letting go of a billiard ball view of how the world works. So instead of you defining what the pockets are, with the cue balls ought to go into the cue balls being people we want to change, and you the cue stick, so you hit them into the pocket. That's a very Newtonian, outdated idea of how the world works. Instead, we need to switch to the quantum view, which is that the world is a matrix. So you think about a baby in a womb. You can't make that baby do anything. And having carried several children, I know that's true. But what you can do is take care of yourself, the instrument. And in that process, the baby can grow what it needs. Well, the same thing gets bigger, and I love the movie, The Matrix, because it kind of proves that you can't move someone else to some other place, but they can move themselves. And people who do try and move them don't understand how the matrix works. So that's a kind of fun story from Einstein that I think reinforces your butterfly effect. Everything is moving, but we are not in charge of it. But we can be in charge of ourselves. And as entrepreneurs, I have so much work I do with all the companies. I run communities where many companies join at one time, like 30 at a time per year, and then they learn from each other. And the major message I say to them is stop thinking about you have a vision, you have a goal, you have targets, and you're going after it. Instead say, what is the womb, the context, the organization, the world around you need to look like, and how do you build that capability so people can choose their own way? I did a major venture some years ago in South Africa, and we built Colgate, Palmolive, and the team built a whole set of small businesses that were instigated by Colgate line workers. And they instigated a lot of entrepreneurial ventures in the townships. And what we did was built the capability of them to figure out what they wanted, where they were going to go, how they were going to help the township women starting businesses. Instead of leading and directing anything for them, we gave them capability. I think that, and we shot through the roof in terms of the returns we were earning for the company, and their small ones like 35% improvement in revenue per quarter. Wouldn't you love to have that? Yeah. And it came not from telling them what to do and setting up a template, but building their capability to think. And it gave a similar return inside of Colgate. So we had the entrepreneurship internally and externally, and Mandela gave us an award, not because we told them how to do it, but because we gave them capability to think.
That ties into, in your book, you talk about the Triad: consciousness, capability, and culture.
Yeah.
So how do those tie together?
So those, to me, the title of the book that you and I are talking about is called Indirect Work. And the billiard ball versus matrix is an example of what that means. Billiard ball is I'm hitting the ball into a pocket, and it better go there. The matrix says I'm building a healthy ecosystem, environment, the capability, et cetera, for people to do things. And I use the example of Phil Jackson, the winningest coach in the National Basketball Association, 11 rings. And his entire life was built on these three things. And I tell, he didn't call them out. I did. I watched him and said, all right, the first one is he is building the capability of Shaquille O'Neal and Michael Jordan and all these great players, not telling them how to play, not even driving them to win, driving them to have capability they needed to be selfless and to play. He got them thinking about the young boys, African-American boys who were watching this team, which was 70% black players. And he said, think about your playing for them and what they can be. And that kind of consciousness really changed how they thought and how they played, rather than thinking for the fans, which mostly drives things. The fans love them. So there are three things you work on. You work on capability, which is thinking capability, being capability. He had so many exercises were about calming and feeling like you were one being and breathing together. Weird stuff, right? Mm-hmm. But that capability to experience yourself as one entity made them play as one, and then creating a culture. That's the matrix, right? The creating a culture where you were driven to care about other players. And he had a Tex winner in basketball, I've forgotten who, I think University of Texas maybe, created this system where players were looking at how much they could support other players scoring and being able to move on the court in a way that anyone at any time could score or defend. And they used that because he said it created a culture of non-competitiveness internally. And then the third thing is, can I see my own mind? Can I see how I'm working and thinking? And I give some principles around how Phil Jackson worked, plus a bunch of companies I've worked in, how they built a capacity. And this is where I come as an educator, which I don't go into companies anymore, but I write books about all this now. How do you build the capacity for people to see their own thinking and make choices about how they're thinking and how they're going to engage people? And then that begins to shift the culture, and you add to capability that, and now you have a team that wins more NBA tournaments than has ever existed, may ever exist again, because most coaches work directly, trying to get you to do this, that, passing, etc. So that's what that Triad stands for.
And when we're talking about thinking and we're talking about change and all of these concepts, and I think a lot of people could nod their heads and say, I agree. That makes a whole lot of sense. Well, how do you educate and teach an organization to start probably from the top down to have their leaders start thinking a new way so that then the next level down starts seeing that change, and then it starts having that ripple effect through the organization?
So first, you don't do it that way. There's no top down. I go into a company for 2 to 3 to 8 years. I was in DuPont in 15, and you have a ritual of development. So you don't try and drive a change. Instead, you educate people about how to notice themselves and how they're working. I start with redoing strategic thinking, and we meet at least a day a month, sometimes more, for several years, because it isn't that you're going to get the, quote, top of the organization changing quickly. And they're in the room with not all from the top, but a cross-section. So, for example, in seventh generation, a month for 3.5 years, and it was an education forum. Now, the minute they walked out the door, they were implementing things, but I didn't tell them what to do. I gave them a different kind of framework, a way to think about strategic thinking, which is, well, one aspect of it is, who are you uniquely as a company that nobody else in the world can do what you do because of who you are? What's the essence of seventh generation? And how is it you change the way you do business model thinking and measuring? We changed everything about performance indices and how you relate to customers. And so all I'm doing is coming in once a month with a day of education and saying, now, how does that change what you're working on? What would you do? And they go off and they do something. And then they come back, but I don't drive them through a program with white belts and black belts. They, when I leave, and most of them I stay friends with forever, they instead learn to think about it themselves and invent their own education programs. In fact, do. And if you do that, it has to be this ritual of where you do it for over several years, because we're so conditioned to think the old way that you don't walk in and do a training for a day or two and give people some kind of certificate. Instead, you change the culture by having a ritual of development. People get used to, we're going to work this week on how we think and how we're working and looking at our business differently, and off they go. So and the key, though, is you have some people who are at the top, some at the middle, some at the bottom, all of whom are considered leaders. They're in the room together, so the hierarchy has changed the minute we start. There's no cascading down. It is cascading out, rippling out. So there's more to it than that. But and I have a couple other books that give more details, like The Regenerative Business and No More Feedback, where you stop a bunch of stuff. And you build new capability. That's how you do it.
Well, Carol, I think that you are just the thought leader that has got some deep content. I've enjoyed talking with you. What's the best way that someone could reach out and learn more about your brand new book and the other works that you do?
Well, first, let me tell you, this book has been #1 bestseller on Amazon for a month, 4 categories. And that you have 100 bestsellers. This has been #1 in organizational change and new releases. If you go to my website, carolsanford.com, it'll give you, I think, 10 options. If you buy one book, you still get something free if you send me the receipt by email, carol@carolsanford.com. But go to carolsanford.com, and you can see all the free things you can get up to, and including if you buy 125 books. And I just shipped, and I saw the notices arrive of one company that bought 800 and is giving them to every customer and every supplier they have. So go there, and from carolsanford.com, you can get to my business communities that you can join, or change agent communities if you want to be in a role like I am. And you can also get to my podcast. You can get to everything from carolsanford.com. So buy a few books, enjoy them, but be sure and send me some receipts so I can give you some free stuff you'll see on the website.
Excellent. Well, Carol, thank you so much for coming on today. It was a real pleasure talking with you.
Well, I've enjoyed talking with you, Mike. Thank you very much.
You've been listening to Influential Entrepreneurs with Mike Saunders. To learn more about the resources mentioned on today's show or listen to past episodes, visit www.influentialentrepreneursradio.com.